The blood on her knuckles mixed with the soapy water as Florence Edwards scrubbed the saloon floor in Genoa, Nevada. And she told herself for the 100th time that this was temporary, that dignity could survive anything if the spirit remained unbroken. The year was 1872, and the Silver Rush had brought every kind of person west, including women like her who had nowhere else to go after their families were lost to cholera on the wagon trail. She pushed the brush harder against the wooden planks, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her calico dress soaked through at the knees where she knelt in the dirty water. Ethan Kane watched her from the top of the stairs, his boots making no sound on the landing as he observed the woman who had been hired 3 days prior to clean the saloon he part-owned with his brother. Most men would have seen just another desperate woman doing desperate work, but Ethan had learned long ago that the truth of a person showed in how they approached even the meanest tasks. This woman, whose name he had learned was Florence, scrubbed those floors with a methodical precision that spoke of pride, her movements fluid and economical, wasting no energy but missing no spot. She worked as though she were polishing silver in a fine house, rather than cleaning up spilled whiskey and tobacco juice in a rough Nevada saloon. He descended the stairs slowly, watching as she sat back on her heels and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of dirt across her brow. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he estimated, though hardship had a way of aging faces beyond their years out here. Her features were delicate despite the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that suggested she had not always known this kind of labor. "You missed a spot," he said, his voice low and tinged with humor. Florence's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing as she scrambled to stand, nearly knocking over the bucket of water in her haste. "Mr. Kane, I apologize. I did not hear you come down. Where did I miss? I will get it right away." He held up a hand to stop her frantic searching. "I was testing you. You have not missed anything. In fact, this floor has not been this clean since the day we built this place." Her flush deepened, but he saw a flash of irritation cross her face before she schooled her expression back to neutral. Good, he thought. She had spirit beneath that careful politeness. "Is there something you need, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pink in her cheeks. "I need to know why a woman who clearly was not raised to scrub floors is scrubbing mine," he said, moving closer and crouching down so they were at eye level. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a striking shade of green, the color of new leaves in spring, and they met his gaze directly despite her obvious discomfort. "I need the work, Mr. Kane. That is reason enough. Call me Ethan. And that is a reason but not an answer." He picked up the brush she had been using and examined it, noting how worn down the bristles were. "We have better brushes than this. Why did no one give you proper supplies? Your brother said this one would do fine for the work I was hired for." Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Thomas had always been the harder of the two of them, seeing people as either useful or in the way. "My brother is practical to a fault. Come with me." He stood and offered her his hand. Florence hesitated, looking at her own wet, reddened hands, then at his clean one. "I will dirty your hand, sir." "Ethan, and I have had dirt on my hands before." He kept his hand extended until she finally placed hers in it, and he pulled her to her feet. Her hand was small in his, the skin rough from harsh soap and hard work, but her grip was firm. He led her to the storage room behind the bar and pulled out a new brush with thick, strong bristles, along with a bar of gentler soap and a pair of work gloves. "These will make the work easier," he said, handing them to her. Florence took the items slowly, her expression wary. "Why are you being kind to me?" "Why would I not be? Men are not kind without wanting something in return. I have learned that lesson well enough." Ethan felt something twist in his chest at the resignation in her voice. "I want clean floors, and I want them cleaned by someone who is not suffering unnecessarily while doing it. Those things are not in conflict." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read something written there in a language she did not quite trust. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, Ethan." The sound of his name on her lips did something strange to his pulse, but he ignored it and gestured back toward the main room. "The morning rush will start soon. You should finish before the first customers arrive." She nodded again and returned to her work, this time with the new supplies. Ethan went to the bar and began his own morning routine of checking inventory and preparing for the day, but he found his attention drifting repeatedly to the woman on the floor. There was something almost meditative about the way she worked, a quiet grace that seemed out of place in the rough surroundings of a frontier saloon. Thomas came down an hour later, his boots heavy on the stairs in a way that announced his presence long before he appeared. He was 3 years older than Ethan's 26 years and built like a bull, all thick muscle and aggressive energy. "We are low on whiskey," he announced without preamble. "I am riding to Carson City to pick up a shipment. I will be back tomorrow." "Fine," Ethan said, wiping down the bar. "Take enough money from the safe." Thomas's gaze landed on Florence, who was now working near the door, and his expression soured. "I see you gave her the good supplies. She is just cleaning floors, Ethan. No need to waste resources on someone who will probably quit or steal from us within the week." Florence's shoulders stiffened, but she kept scrubbing without turning around. "She is doing good work and deserves good tools," Ethan said evenly. "That is how you keep good workers. Good workers cost money. Desperate workers cost less." Thomas grabbed his hat from behind the bar. "You have always been too soft. It is a wonder we make any profit at all." After Thomas left, the tension in the room eased perceptibly. Florence sat back and finally looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Your brother does not think much of me. My brother does not think much of anyone. Do not take it personally. I do not. I have known many men like him." She returned to her work, and Ethan thought that would be the end of the conversation, but then she spoke again, her voice quieter. "But I have known fewer men like you." The morning customers began trickling in around 9, mostly miners and ranch hands looking for a drink before starting their day or ending their night shift. Ethan worked the bar while Florence finished the floors and moved on to wiping down tables and chairs. He noticed how she moved efficiently around the men, never making eye contact unless spoken to directly, never inviting conversation. She had learned to make herself invisible, he realized, a skill many women in her position had to master. Around noon, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. A well-dressed man entered, his suit dusty from travel but clearly expensive, his demeanor that of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Behind him came 2 rough-looking men who were obviously hired muscle. "I am looking for Florence Edwards," the man announced to the room at large. Florence, who had been cleaning a table near the back, froze. The color drained from her face, and Ethan saw her hands start to shake. "Who is asking?" Ethan called out, moving from behind the bar. The man's cold eyes fixed on him. "Roderick Edwards. I am looking for my sister-in-law who ran away from her obligations in Sacramento." "I have no obligations to you," Florence said, her voice stronger than Ethan would have expected given how she looked moments ago. "My husband is dead. That ended any connection between us. You are wrong about that." Roderick moved deeper into the saloon, his men flanking him. "My brother left debts, and as his widow those debts are now yours. You owe me $3,000. I do not have $3,000. I do not have $30. That is why I am here scrubbing floors instead of living in comfort." Then you will work off the debt in other ways. Roderick's smile was unpleasant. I own several establishments in San Francisco where a pretty woman like you could earn quite a lot. The implication was clear, and Ethan felt anger surge through him. She is not going anywhere with you. Roderick turned his attention to Ethan, looking him up and down dismissively. This does not concern you, Cowboy. This is family business. I am making it my business. The lady says she does not owe you anything, and she is not leaving with you. That is the end of the discussion. One of Roderick's men moved forward, his hand going to the gun at his hip. The saloon went quiet, every man present suddenly aware that violence was about to unfold. Ethan kept his hands relaxed at his sides, but he shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself between Florence and the threat. "I do not want trouble," Roderick said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "But I will not leave without what is owed to me. $3,000 or the woman. Choose." "How about neither?" Ethan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "How about you explain exactly what these debts are and why you think a widow should pay for her dead husband's mistakes?" "He borrowed money from me to invest in a mining claim. The claim failed. The debt remains." "Did Florence sign any papers agreeing to this debt?" Roderick's jaw tightened. "That is not relevant." "It is entirely relevant. If she did not sign anything, then legally she owes you nothing. You cannot collect debts from someone who never agreed to them." Ethan looked at Florence. "Did you sign anything?" "No, I did not even know about the loan until after my husband died." "Roderick showed up at the funeral and demanded payment, but I had no money and no papers that said I owed him anything." "Then as far as I am concerned, you can leave now," Ethan said to Roderick. "And if you return to harass Miss Edwards again, I will contact the sheriff and we can settle this matter properly in a court of law." Roderick's face reddened with anger. "You are making a mistake, Cowboy. I am not a man who forgets when someone crosses him. Neither am I." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Roderick gestured to his men and turned toward the door. "This is not over, Florence. You will pay what is owed one way or another." After they left, the normal noise of the saloon slowly resumed, though many eyes remained on Florence and Ethan. Florence was shaking visibly now, her earlier composure crumbling. Ethan guided her gently to a chair and poured her a small measure of whiskey from behind the bar. "Drink this. It will help with the shock." She took the glass with trembling hands and sipped, then coughed at the burn. "I am sorry. I did not mean to bring trouble to your establishment." "You did not bring trouble. That man did." Ethan pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Tell me the whole story." Florence took another sip of whiskey, then set the glass down and folded her hands in her lap. "I married James Edwards 3 years ago in Missouri. He was charming and ambitious, and I was young and foolish enough to believe his promises. We came west so he could make his fortune in mining. For a while, things were good. Then James started drinking, gambling, borrowing money from anyone who would lend it. I did not know how bad it had gotten until he died in a mine collapse 6 months ago. And Roderick showed up at the funeral." "Yes." "He said James owed him $3,000 for a mining investment. He had a contract, but only James's signature was on it. When I could not pay, he said I would have to work for him in San Francisco. I knew what kind of work he meant. I ran. I sold everything I had and took the first stage heading anywhere. I ended up here because I ran out of money. The contract is not legally binding against you if you did not sign it," Ethan said, "but men like Roderick do not care much about legality. They care about power and getting what they want. I know. That is why I have been trying to stay invisible, to just work and save money so I could move on before anyone found me. I should have known it would not last." Ethan studied her face, seeing the fear there but also the determination. She had survived a bad marriage, the death of her husband, and 6 months of running and hiding. Lesser people would have broken under that weight, but Florence Edwards was still fighting. "You do not have to run," he said quietly. "You can stay here. I will make sure Roderick does not bother you again." "Why would you do that? You do not know me. You have no reason to put yourself at risk for my sake." "Maybe I am just contrary enough not to like bullies." He smiled slightly. "Or maybe I think someone who scrubs floors with as much care as you do deserves better than to be hounded by a man trying to collect debts that are not hers to pay." Florence's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I cannot afford to pay you for protection. I can barely afford to feed myself. I am not asking for payment, I am offering help." He stood and extended his hand again. "Come on, your shift is over for today. Let me buy you a real meal." She looked at his hand, then at his face, searching for the catch, the hidden price. When she found none, she slowly placed her hand in his and let him help her up. "I do not understand you, Ethan Kane." "Good. I would hate to be predictable." He took her to the boarding house down the street where he rented a room, knowing the landlady, Mrs. Chen, served meals to her tenants and would not mind an extra plate for a guest. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese widow who had come to Nevada with her husband during the railroad construction and stayed after his death, building a respectable business despite the prejudice she faced daily. She took one look at Florence's pale face and immediately began preparing food without asking questions. They ate in the small dining room, simple food but well prepared: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Florence ate slowly at first, as if unused to having enough food, then with more enthusiasm as her hunger overcame her caution. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "I have not had a meal like this in months. Mrs. Chen is an excellent cook. She could run a restaurant if she wanted, but she prefers the boarding house. Says it is less complicated." They talked while they ate, careful conversation at first, then more relaxed as Florence began to trust that Ethan's kindness was genuine. She told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress, how she had loved reading and learning until her father died, and her mother remarried a man who thought education was wasted on girls. She told him about meeting James, how different he had seemed from her stepfather, how she had thought marriage would be her escape. "Instead, it was a different kind of prison," she said quietly. "James was never cruel to me, but he was reckless and selfish. He cared more about his dreams of wealth than about building a real life together." "Not all men are like that," Ethan said. "I am beginning to think you might be proof of that." She looked at him curiously. "What about you? How did you end up owning a saloon in Nevada?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering how much to share. "My brother and I came west after the war. Our parents died while we were away fighting, and there was nothing left for us in Virginia. We worked as ranch hands, saved our money, and eventually bought the saloon. It is not much, but it is ours." "Which side did you fight for?" It was a loaded question in 1872, with the wounds of the war still fresh. "The Union. Thomas and I never owned slaves and never believed in it. That decision cost us everything we had back home, but I have never regretted it." Florence nodded slowly. "My husband fought for the Confederacy. He never talked about it much, but I think he carried guilt about it. Maybe that was part of why he drank." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and painting the room in warm gold. Ethan found himself studying the way the light caught in Florence's hair, bringing out hints of auburn he had not noticed before. She was lovely, he realized, not in the flashy way of the saloon girls who worked the evening shift, but in a quieter, more enduring way. "I should get back," Florence said eventually. "I need to wash my dress and prepare for tomorrow." "You are not working tomorrow. Take the day to rest." "I cannot afford to lose a day's wages." "You will still be paid. Consider it a benefit of surviving an encounter with a man like Roderick Edwards." When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "I insist. Besides, I need to make some arrangements to ensure he does not try to take you by force." Fear flashed across her face again. "You think he will come back?" "I think men like him do not give up easily. But do not worry. I have friends who can help make sure you are safe." Over the following days, Ethan made good on his promise. He spoke to the sheriff, a grizzled former cavalry officer named Bill Winters, who agreed to keep an eye out for Roderick and his men. He also talked to several of the local ranch owners and business people, building a network of folks who would watch out for Florence and report any suspicious activity. Word spread quickly in a small town like Genoa, and soon most people knew that Florence Edwards was under Ethan Kane's protection. Florence returned to work after her day of rest, but Ethan noticed a change in her. She was less guarded, more willing to smile and engage in brief conversations with the regular customers. She still worked with the same careful precision, but there was less desperation in her movements, as if she was beginning to believe she might actually be safe here. Ethan found himself making excuses to talk to her throughout the day. He would ask her opinion on the arrangement of the tables, or whether she thought they needed new curtains for the windows, or what she thought of various items on the menu that the evening cook prepared. At first, Florence seemed confused by his questions, as if she could not quite understand why her opinion would matter. But gradually, she began to offer her thoughts more freely, and Ethan was impressed by her practical intelligence and good sense. "You should serve more vegetables with the meals," she said one afternoon while helping him inventory the dry goods. "The men who work in the mines need more than just meat and bread to stay healthy. Scurvy is a real problem in mining camps." "That is a good point. Do you know how to cook?" "Of course. My mother taught me before she died. I could prepare some simple vegetable dishes if you wanted, nothing fancy but nourishing. Consider yourself promoted. You will spend your mornings cleaning and your afternoons helping prepare the evening meal. The pay will be better." Florence's eyes widened. "You do not have to do that. I am not doing it out of charity. I am doing it because you have a skill we need, and I am smart enough to recognize that. This is business, Florence, not kindness." But they both knew it was more than that. Something was growing between them, something neither was quite ready to name, but both could feel building like a storm on the horizon. Thomas returned from Carson City in a foul mood, complaining about the roads and the price of whiskey and the general state of the world. His mood did not improve when he saw Florence working in the kitchen area, preparing vegetables for the evening stew. "What is this?" he demanded of Ethan. "I hired her to scrub floors, not to cook. She is doing both and doing them well. The customers have been complimenting the meals." "You are paying her more." "Yes, because she is doing more." Thomas's face reddened. "You are letting that woman twist you around her finger, and it is going to cost us money. She is not worth it, Ethan. She is just some widow with a pretty face and a sad story." "That is enough." Ethan's voice went cold. "Florence is a valuable employee, and you will treat her with respect. Or what? You will take her side over your own brother, if I have to, yes." The two men stared at each other, years of accumulated tensions suddenly visible in the space between them. Thomas had always been harder, more focused on profit and survival, while Ethan believed there was room for compassion even in the harsh realities of frontier life. Usually they found a way to balance their different approaches, but something was shifting now, a fundamental disagreement that could not be easily resolved. Finally, Thomas spat on the floor and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Florence appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, her face pale. "I am causing problems between you and your brother. Maybe I should leave." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "Thomas and I have had disagreements before, and we will have them again. That is not your fault and not your responsibility. You are staying. Why does this matter so much to you? Why do I matter so much to you?" It was a fair question, and Ethan found himself without a ready answer. He moved closer to her, near enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes, the faint freckles across her nose that her bonnet usually hid. "Because when I watch you work, I see someone who has not let the world break her spirit. Because you scrub floors like they matter, like the work itself has dignity regardless of how humble it is. Because you survived things that would have destroyed lesser people, and you are still fighting." He paused, then added more quietly, "Because when you smile, which you do not do nearly often enough, it feels like sunrise." Florence's breath caught. "Ethan, I am not ready for this. I do not know if I will ever be ready. My marriage was not a happy one, and I am still carrying the weight of that failure." "It was not your failure. It was his. And I am not asking you for anything you are not ready to give. I am just telling you the truth." She reached up and touched his face gently, her work-roughened fingers soft against his cheek. "You are a good man, Ethan Kane, better than I deserve. You deserve far better than you have gotten from life so far. I would like to help change that if you will let me." Before either of them could say more, the door burst open and one of the local ranch hands stumbled in, breathing hard. "Ethan, you need to come quick. There is trouble at the livery stable." Ethan grabbed his gun belt and turned to Florence. "Stay here and lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone except me or Sheriff Winters." He ran out into the late afternoon sun, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. The livery stable was 3 buildings down from the saloon, and a small crowd had gathered outside. He pushed through to find Sheriff Winters standing over 2 men who were tied up and sitting in the dirt. Ethan recognized them as Roderick Edwards' hired muscle. "Found these 2 trying to set a fire behind your saloon," Winters said grimly. "They figured they would smoke you and the girl out, grab her in the confusion." Cold fury washed over Ethan. "Where is Edwards himself?" "Took off the moment he realized we were onto them. I have got men searching, but he has probably already left town. He will be back." "Men like that always come back." "Maybe. But now we have witnesses and evidence of attempted arson. If he shows his face in Nevada again, I can arrest him on sight." Winters jerked his thumb at the 2 captured men. "These fellows have been very cooperative once they realized they were looking at prison time. Told us all about Edwards and his various illegal activities. Turns out he is wanted in California for fraud and extortion." Ethan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "So Florence is safe." "As safe as anyone can be out here. Edwards is a coward at heart. Without his muscle to back him up and with the law looking for him, I doubt he will risk coming after her again. Not worth it for a debt that is not even legally valid." Ethan returned to the saloon to find Florence standing by the window, wringing her hands. She turned when he entered, her face anxious. "What happened?" "I heard shouting." He explained quickly about the attempted arson and Roderick's flight. As he talked, he watched the fear drain from her face, replaced first by relief and then by something that looked like cautious hope. "So it is really over. He is gone. It is over. You are safe, Florence." She closed her eyes and swayed slightly. Ethan crossed the room quickly and steadied her, his hands on her shoulders. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet with tears. "I have been afraid for so long," she whispered. "I cannot remember what it feels like not to be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster." "Then maybe it is time to learn." He pulled her gently into his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. They stood like that for a long time, the last rays of sunlight painting the room in shades of amber and gold. That night, after the saloon closed and the last customers had stumbled home, Ethan walked Florence to Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where he had arranged a room for her. It was not much, just a small space with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street, but it was clean and safe and entirely hers. "I will pay you back for this," Florence said, standing in the doorway, "for the room and everything else you have done. I do not want to be paid back. I want you to save your money so you have choices, so you never have to scrub floors in a saloon unless you want to." She smiled, and he felt that sunrise feeling again, warmth spreading through his chest. What if I want to? What if I have grown fond of that particular saloon and its owner? Then I would say I am a very lucky man. She kissed him then, soft and brief, just a whisper of lips against his. "Good night, Ethan. Good night, Florence." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness, unlike anything Ethan had known before. Florence bloomed like a flower finally given enough water and sun, her natural warmth and intelligence emerging as her fear receded. She proved to be an excellent cook, and soon the evening meals at the saloon became popular enough that Ethan had to bring in additional tables. She also had a gift for dealing with difficult customers, able to diffuse tense situations with a combination of gentle humor and firm boundaries that left even the most aggressive drunks sheepish and apologetic. Thomas remained cool toward her, but he could not argue with the increased profits her cooking brought in, and eventually, an uneasy truce settled between him and Ethan. The brothers did not discuss Florence directly, but Thomas stopped making disparaging comments, and that was progress enough. Ethan and Florence fell into a rhythm of quiet courtship, though neither spoke explicitly of what was happening between them. He would bring her coffee in the mornings while she prepared vegetables for the day. She would save him the best portions of the evening meal, and they would eat together after the rush died down. On Sundays, when the saloon was closed, they would walk together through the town and the surrounding countryside, talking about everything and nothing. One Sunday afternoon in late September, they hiked up into the hills east of town, following a trail that led to a small lake surrounded by aspen trees. The aspens were turning gold, their leaves shimmering in the breeze like coins, and the air smelled of autumn and pine. They sat on a fallen log by the water's edge and shared the picnic lunch Florence had prepared. "I have been thinking," Florence said, watching the patterns of light on the water, "about what happens next, about the future." Ethan's heart kicked against his ribs. "What conclusions have you reached?" "That I have spent too much of my life being afraid. Afraid of my stepfather, afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of ending up alone and destitute. That fear drove me to marry James even though I knew in my heart it was a mistake. And after he died, I was so afraid of Roderick and what he would do to me that I could not see any path forward except running and hiding. That is understandable given what you went through. Maybe. But I do not want to live that way anymore. I do not want to make decisions based on fear." She turned to look at him directly. "I have feelings for you, Ethan. Strong feelings that I think you share. But I need to know that whatever happens between us is real, not just me clinging to the first kind man who offered help. How do we know that? By being honest, by taking our time, by building something together as equals, not as rescuer and rescued." She took a deep breath. "I want to keep working at the saloon, keep earning my own money, keep building my independence. And if, while I am doing that, we find that what we feel for each other grows stronger rather than fading away, then maybe we can talk about something more permanent." Ethan felt a rush of admiration for her courage and clear-headedness. Many women in her position would have rushed to secure the safety of marriage, but Florence was choosing the harder path of building her own foundation first. "I can live with that," he said, "though I should tell you that my feelings for you are not going to fade. I knew that the first day I saw you scrubbing those floors like they mattered." She laughed, the sound bright and free. "Because of how I scrubbed floors, that is the strangest declaration of affection I have ever heard. It was not the scrubbing itself, it was the grace in it, the dignity. You could have done the minimum, just enough to get paid and get through the day. But you did it well because that is who you are. Someone who does not compromise on quality or integrity, regardless of circumstances. That is rare, Florence. That is precious." She kissed him then, longer and deeper than that first brief kiss weeks ago. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I think I am falling in love with you," she said softly, "and it terrifies me. I am already there, and I am terrified too, but I think it is worth it." They sat by the lake until the sun began to set, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Florence wanted to save enough money to open a small restaurant someday, a place with good food and a welcoming atmosphere. Ethan talked about his dream of buying a ranch, raising horses, building something lasting. They talked about children, about whether they wanted them and how many and how they would raise them. They talked about the changing West, the railroads bringing new people and new ideas, the slow march toward statehood for Nevada. "Everything is changing so fast," Florence said. "Sometimes I wonder what the world will look like in 20 years. Different, certainly, hopefully better." Ethan took her hand. "But whatever it looks like, I hope we face it together." "I hope that too." Autumn turned to winter, and with it came the first real test of their growing relationship. A particularly harsh snowstorm hit Genoa in November, shutting down the roads and trapping everyone in town for nearly a week. The saloon became an impromptu shelter for people who could not make it home, and Florence worked tirelessly to feed everyone with the supplies they had on hand. Ethan watched her manage chaos with calm efficiency, organizing people to help, rationing food without making anyone feel shorted, keeping spirits up with songs and stories. On the third night of the storm, when everyone else had finally fallen asleep in various corners of the saloon, Ethan found Florence sitting alone by the fire, staring into the flames. "You should rest," he said, sitting beside her. "You have been working non-stop for 3 days." "I cannot sleep." "Too much to think about." "Like what?" "Like how strange it is that I feel more at home here, in this saloon in the middle of a snowstorm, than I ever did in the house I shared with James. Like how I catch myself being happy at the oddest moments. Like how I wake up looking forward to the day instead of dreading it. Those sound like good things to think about. They are. But they also make me realize how much of my life I wasted being unhappy. I was so focused on survival that I forgot to actually live." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. "You are living now. That is what matters." She leaned into him. "I love you, Ethan Kane. I fought it for a long time because I was afraid, but I cannot fight it anymore and I do not want to. I love you too. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you scrubbing those floors with such fierce concentration. You and your floor scrubbing." But she was smiling as she said it. "Marry me, Florence, not because you need protection or security, but because we fit together. Because we make each other better. Because I cannot imagine facing the future without you beside me." She was quiet for a long moment, and Ethan's heart pounded as he waited for her answer. Then she turned to him, her green eyes bright in the firelight. "Yes, but not yet. I want to say yes, and I will say yes, but I need a little more time. I need to be certain in my bones that I am choosing this for the right reasons. Can you be patient with me just a little longer?" I can wait as long as you need. I am not going anywhere." They kissed in the firelight while the storm raged outside and 24 people snored around them, and Ethan thought he had never been so happy in all his 26 years. The storm finally broke on the 5th day, and life slowly returned to normal. Christmas came and went, celebrated with a feast at the saloon that brought together most of the town. Florence cooked for 3 days straight, preparing dishes that reminded Ethan of the Christmas meals from his childhood in Virginia, rich and comforting and full of love. On New Year's Day 1873, Florence woke early and walked to the saloon before Ethan arrived. She let herself in with the key he had given her and set about scrubbing the floors, not because they needed it particularly, but because she wanted to return to where it all began. She was on her hands and knees, working methodically across the wooden planks, when she heard the door open behind her. "Starting the new year the way you started here." Ethan's voice was warm with humor. Florence sat back on her heels and looked at him, this man who had seen her at her lowest and treated her with dignity anyway, who had protected her without expecting anything in return, who had fallen in love with her because of how she scrubbed floors. "I am ready now," she said. "Ask me again." Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside her on the wet floor, taking her hands in his. "Florence Edwards, will you marry me? Will you be my partner and my equal, my friend and my love, for whatever time we are given in this world?" "Yes. To all of it, yes." He kissed her there on the wet floor, and Florence felt something unlock in her chest, some tight knot of fear and grief finally releasing. She had scrubbed these floors as a desperate woman with no choices, and now she was choosing freely to build a life with the man who had seen past the desperation to the person beneath. They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the boarding house, with Sheriff Winters and Mrs. Chen as witnesses. Thomas attended but did not speak much, his feelings about the marriage still mixed. But he shook Ethan's hand afterward and nodded politely to Florence, which was as much blessing as they were likely to get from him. Mrs. Chen prepared a feast for the wedding dinner, and half the town showed up to celebrate. There were miners and ranch hands, shopkeepers and their wives, even a few of the painted ladies from the other saloon down the street. They danced to a fiddle player's music and ate until they could eat no more, and when the evening finally wound down, Ethan carried Florence over the threshold of the small house he had been building in secret on the edge of town. "You built this?" Florence walked through the rooms in wonder. It was not large, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was solidly constructed and filled with thoughtful details. There were bookshelves in the main room because he knew she loved to read. The kitchen had a large workspace because he knew she loved to cook. The bedroom had windows facing east so she could wake to the sunrise. "I wanted you to have a real home, not a room in a boarding house or a space above a saloon, but a place that is truly yours, ours." Florence turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "How did I get so lucky? How did I go from scrubbing floors to being married to the best man I have ever known? I am the lucky one. I got to watch you scrub those floors." She laughed through her tears and pulled him close. They made love for the first time that night, tender and passionate and full of joy. 2 people who had found each other against all odds in the rough wilderness of the Nevada territory. Florence continued working at the saloon after their marriage, though now as a partner rather than an employee. She and Ethan made changes together, improving the menu, renovating the space, building a reputation for fair dealing and good food that drew customers from miles around. Thomas eventually sold his share of the business to them and moved to San Francisco, where he felt more at home in the bustling city life. The parting was amicable if not warm, and Ethan felt relieved to finally have full control of the business he and Florence were building together. As the years passed, their saloon became the heart of Genoa's social life. Florence started hosting community dinners once a month, bringing people together regardless of their background or circumstances. She befriended the Chinese workers who were often excluded from other establishments, the Mexican families who worked the nearby ranches, the Paiute people who came to town to trade. Ethan watched her create something rare in the frontier West, a place where everyone was welcome if they treated others with respect. In the spring of 1874, Florence discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan over breakfast one morning, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then leaped up and spun her around the kitchen, whooping with joy. "Careful," she laughed. "You will make me sick." "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. Florence, this is wonderful." "You are not worried about the dangers of childbirth, about whether we are ready, about any of it?" "Of course I am worried. I am terrified. But I am also happier than I have words for." He set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a child. A whole new person who is part you and part me. That is miraculous." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father, and he filled their house with noise and laughter and chaos. Florence proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving but firm when needed. Ethan was equally devoted, spending hours playing with Samuel or walking him around the house when he cried at night, singing the old songs his own father had sung to him. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny, fierce creature with lungs that could wake the dead. They named her Caroline, and from the start, she was her own person, independent and determined. Florence would laugh watching Ethan try to get Caroline to do anything she did not want to do, telling him this was his karma for being so stubborn himself. "She gets it from you," Ethan protested, trying to convince 3-year-old Caroline to put on her shoes. "She absolutely does. And I could not be prouder." As their children grew, Florence and Ethan made sure they understood the values that had built their family: hard work, dignity in all tasks, compassion for those struggling, and the importance of treating everyone as equals regardless of their station in life. They told their children the story of how they met, how Florence had been scrubbing floors when Ethan saw past the circumstances to the person beneath. "That is why we never judge people by their situation," Florence told them. "You never know someone's full story just by looking at them." "Your father taught me that. Your mother taught me that grace can be found anywhere," Ethan added, "even on your hands and knees scrubbing floors." The West continued to change around them. Nevada achieved statehood in 1864 before they met, but the full implications of that change took years to unfold. Railroads expanded, bringing more settlers and more commerce. Genoa grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools and churches and paved streets. The wild lawlessness of the early days gave way to established order, though the spirit of independence and self-reliance remained through it all. Florence and Ethan's saloon remained a constant, adapting to the times while maintaining its core identity as a place of welcome and good food. They eventually expanded, buying the building next door and adding a proper restaurant separate from the saloon. Florence ran the restaurant while Ethan managed the saloon, and both flourished under their care. In 1885, 13 years after they married, a letter arrived that shook Florence to her core. It was from a lawyer in Sacramento, informing her that Roderick Edwards had died in prison, where he had been serving time for fraud. In his will, he had made a confession about the debt he claimed her husband owed him. It had never existed. James had borrowed no money from Roderick. The whole story had been fabricated as a way to force Florence into working for him in San Francisco. He admitted it was all a lie, Florence said, her hands shaking as she held the letter. James never owed him anything. He was just a predator who saw a vulnerable widow and tried to exploit her. Ethan wrapped his arms around her. I am sorry. I know that must be difficult to learn. I mourned James despite everything, felt guilty about his debts, worried that maybe I could have done something different to prevent it all. And now, I find out it was all a manipulation. She looked up at Ethan. If you had not protected me, if you had not seen me as worth defending, Roderick would have succeeded. I would have ended up in one of his brothels, my whole life destroyed. But that did not happen. You are here, safe and loved, with children and a business and a future. Roderick failed, and he died in prison while you thrived. That is the justice that matters. Florence kept that letter as a reminder of how close she had come to a terrible fate, and how much her life had changed because one man chose to see her worth when she was at her lowest. She showed it to her children when they were old enough to understand, teaching them that sometimes the difference between destruction and salvation came down to whether someone chose kindness over indifference. As the years passed, their family grew. Samuel married a schoolteacher named Margaret in 1895, and they gave Florence and Ethan their first grandchildren, twin boys who were absolute terrors and completely adored. Caroline shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first women in Nevada to do so, using the money she inherited from her parents to attend medical school in San Francisco, despite the obstacles she faced. I learned from watching you that women can do anything if they refuse to be told no, Caroline told Florence. You built a business and a reputation on your own terms. You taught me that my worth is not defined by what others think I should do. In 1900, Ethan and Florence sold the saloon and restaurant to a young couple who reminded them of themselves. Hardworking, full of dreams, determined to build something lasting. They kept the house Ethan had built and spent their days gardening, reading, playing with their grandchildren, and enjoying the peaceful rhythms of a life well lived. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1903, Florence woke early and walked to the saloon, which was now called the Golden Eagle and barely resembled the rough establishment where she had once scrubbed floors. The new owners had modernized it, adding electric lights and polished fixtures. But the bones of the building were the same, and Florence stood in the doorway remembering. I knew I would find you here. Ethan's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him standing in the early morning sun, his hair now silver but his eyes still the same warm brown she had first looked into decades ago. I was just thinking about how much has changed. How different everything is from that day I arrived in Genoa with nothing but the clothes on my back and enough money for a week's room and board. You had more than that. You had strength and grace and dignity, even if you could not see it at the time. He took her hand. I could see it, though. I saw it in how you scrubbed those floors like they mattered. Florence laughed. 30 years and you are still talking about those floors. 30 years and I am still amazed that I got to marry the woman who scrubbed them. He pulled her close. Happy anniversary, Florence Kane. Happy anniversary, my love. They stood together in the doorway of the saloon where their story began. Two people who had found each other across the divide of circumstance and built a life of meaning and joy. They had raised children who went out into the world with strength and compassion. They had built a business that served their community for decades. They had created a marriage based on equality and respect, where both partners contributed their gifts and honored each other's worth. As they walked home together through the streets of Genoa, now paved and lined with mature trees, Florence thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and desperate, scrubbing floors in a strange saloon in a strange town. That woman had survived. More than survived, she had thrived. And she had done it not by being rescued, but by being seen. That afternoon, the whole family gathered at their house for a celebration. Samuel and his wife brought their children, now teenagers. Caroline came from Virginia City, where she ran a medical practice. Friends from all over the region arrived to honor the couple who had been pillars of the community for 3 decades. Mrs. Chen was there, now in her 70s, but still spry, regaling the grandchildren with stories of how Florence had first arrived in Genoa. "Your grandmother was the saddest-looking woman I had ever seen," Mrs. Chen said, "but also the strongest. I knew the moment I met her that she would survive whatever came. I just did not know she would find love too." "Tell us how Grandpa asked you to marry him," one of the twins begged Florence. So she told the story, as she had many times before, about the New Year's Day when she had scrubbed the saloon floors one last time, and Ethan had knelt beside her on the wet floor to propose. The children loved the romance of it, but Florence knew the real story went deeper than a single proposal. It was about how Ethan had seen her worth when she was at her lowest, how he had protected her without demanding anything in return, how he had offered her partnership instead of rescue. "Your grandfather made me his equal before I even believed I could be anyone's equal," she told the children. That was the real gift, not just love but respect, not just protection but partnership. Ethan pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "You were always my equal, I just helped you see it." As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, Florence stood on the porch of their house and looked out over the town that had become her home. She had arrived here running from a false debt, desperate and afraid, with no future she could see. She had left here as a woman who had built a successful business, raised good children, and spent 3 decades married to a man who saw her at her worst and loved her anyway. She thought about the journey from scrubbing floors to standing here surrounded by family and friends who loved her. It had not always been easy. There had been lean years and hard times, arguments and disappointments. But through it all, she and Ethan had held onto the core of what had brought them together: mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the knowledge that love was not about one person saving another, but about 2 people choosing to build something together. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, joining her on the porch. "That I would do it all again. Every difficult moment, every scary decision, every time I fell asleep exhausted and woke up sore. I would do it all again because it led me here to this life with you. Even the floor scrubbing. Especially the floor scrubbing, because that is when you saw me. Really saw me, not as a charity case or a victim, but as a person worthy of respect and kindness. That changed everything." They stood together watching the stars come out over Nevada, 2 people who had found each other in the Wild West and built a life of meaning and joy. They had proven that love could grow in the hardest soil, that dignity could be found in the humblest circumstances, that true partnership meant seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. Years later, when Florence was in her 60s, a young woman came to their door looking for work. She had the same desperate look Florence remembered wearing herself decades ago, the same careful way of holding herself as if trying not to take up too much space in the world. Florence invited her in, gave her tea and food, and listened to her story of loss and hardship. "I heard you sometimes hire people," the young woman said. "I can clean, cook, whatever you need. I am a hard worker and I will not cause trouble." Florence looked at Ethan, who nodded slightly. "We do not need help right now," Florence said gently, watching the hope drain from the young woman's face. "But the new owners of the Golden Eagle are looking for a cook. I could introduce you if you are interested. The pay is fair and they are good people. I would appreciate that so much. Thank you. As Florence walked the young woman to the saloon the next morning, she told her story of arriving in Genoa with nothing, of scrubbing floors, of being seen and valued by someone who looked past circumstances to character. That is a beautiful story, the young woman said. But things like that do not usually happen in real life, do they? They do if people choose to make them happen. My husband chose to see me as more than my circumstances. I chose to believe I deserved better than I had gotten. The owners of this saloon will choose whether to see your worth or just your desperation. Those choices matter. The young woman got the job, and Florence made sure to check on her regularly, offering advice and friendship. She watched the woman grow in confidence and skill, eventually marrying one of the local ranch hands and starting her own family. It felt like completing a circle, passing on the grace that had been shown to her so many years ago. In the winter of 1908, Ethan fell ill with pneumonia. Florence nursed him through it with the same fierce determination she had once applied to scrubbing floors, refusing to accept that their time together might be ending. After 3 frightening weeks, he recovered, though the illness left him weaker than before. "You are not allowed to leave me yet," Florence told him as he sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. "We still have grandchildren to spoil and stories to tell. I am not going anywhere if I can help it. We made a deal, remember, partners and equals, for whatever time we are given." "Then you better plan on more time. I am not done with you, Ethan Kane." He recovered fully by spring, and they had another decade together. They watched their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. They saw automobiles become common on the streets of Genoa, saw electric lights replace gas lamps throughout the town, saw the world change in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. They still held hands when they walked. They still laughed at each other's jokes and finished each other's sentences. They still looked at each other sometimes with the same wonder they had felt in those early days, amazed at their luck in finding each other. On a warm June evening in 1918, 45 years after they had married, Ethan and Florence sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their 70s now, their movements slower but their love undiminished. "You remember that day I saw you scrubbing the floors?" Ethan asked, as he had asked countless times over the years. "How could I forget? You gave me new brushes and better soap and treated me like I mattered." "You did matter. You still matter. You always will." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder. "We built something good, did we not? Out of nothing, out of desperation and fear and floors that needed scrubbing, we built this whole life. We did, and I would not change a single moment of it." They sat together in the gathering dusk, 2 people who had found grace in humble circumstances and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. Florence thought about that frightened young woman who had arrived in Genoa, with nothing but her capacity for hard work and her stubborn determination to survive. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past the circumstances to the person beneath, who had offered respect and partnership instead of pity or exploitation. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For seeing me. For making me your equal when I did not even believe I could be anyone's equal. For loving me not despite how we met but because of it." Ethan pulled her closer. "Thank you for scrubbing those floors with such grace that I could not help but fall in love with you. Thank you for surviving everything you survived so you could be there that day. Thank you for choosing to build this life with me." They watched the stars come out over Nevada, over the town that had been their home for nearly 5 decades. In the house behind them, photographs lined the walls. Their wedding day, their children as babies, graduations and weddings and new babies, a visual record of a life built on love and respect and mutual partnership. Florence thought about all the ways their story could have gone differently. If Ethan had been a different kind of man, if she had been too broken to accept help, if any of 1,000 small moments had shifted slightly. But they had not. They had met at exactly the right moment, two people who needed each other in different ways, and they had built something lasting from that meeting. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been 45 years ago. "I have loved you since that day you knelt beside me on the wet floor and asked me to marry you. Before that, even. I loved you from the moment you gave me better brushes and treated my work as worthy of respect. I love you too. I have loved you since I saw you scrubbing those floors like they mattered, like the work itself had dignity regardless of how humble it was." He kissed her forehead gently. "You taught me what grace looks like, Florence Kane. Every day we have had together, you have taught me that." As they sat together in the warm Nevada night, surrounded by the evidence of a well-lived life, Florence felt a deep sense of peace. She had started with nothing, had been reduced to her lowest point, scrubbing floors in a strange saloon in a strange town. And from that humble beginning, she had built a life of meaning and purpose. She had been a wife and mother, a businesswoman and community leader. She had been loved and had loved in return with a depth and constancy that had sustained her through every challenge. But more than any of that, she had been seen. Ethan had looked at her when she was at her lowest and had seen not a desperate woman to be pitied or exploited, but a person of worth and dignity deserving of respect. That moment of being truly seen had changed everything, had given her the foundation to build a new life on her own terms, and she had seen him too. Had recognized the goodness in him, the rare combination of strength and compassion that made him the kind of man who would kneel beside a woman scrubbing floors and offer her partnership instead of charity. They had seen each other truly and had chosen each other freely, and that mutual recognition and respect had been the foundation of 45 years of happiness. As the moon rose over Genoa, Florence and Ethan remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, knowing that whatever time remained to them would be enough because they had each other. They had built a love story out of scrubbed floors and better brushes, out of respect offered and dignity recognized, out of two people choosing to see each other's worth and make each other equals. It was, Florence thought, the best possible ending to a story that had started with such fear and uncertainty. And it was, more importantly, the culmination of a life lived with grace and purpose, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership. They had proven that love could flourish even in the hardest circumstances, that dignity could be found in the humblest tasks, and that the simple act of seeing another person's worth could change everything. Their story lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the businesses they had built and the community they had served, through every act of kindness they had shown and every person they had helped. But most of all, it lived on in the simple truth that remained at the heart of it all. Sometimes, when you look past circumstances to see the person beneath, when you treat someone as an equal regardless of their situation, you find not just grace but love itself, waiting to be recognized and cherished for a lifetime.